In this video, we'll be taking a look at 5 college basketball games happening on January 24th, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 10 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released, so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 5 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. North Carolina versus Virginia. North Carolina Tar Heels at Virginia Cavaliers on Saturday, January 24th, 2026. With that early America tip is the kind of game that feels big as soon as you see it on the board. You have one team that loves to score in bunches and another that usually forces you to sit through a half-court chess match every single trip. Honestly, that contrast is the real story here. North Carolina comes in with that reputation of putting up points and playing with pace, but their road version has been a lot more fragile than the name on the jersey suggests. They are sitting on a 1-3 road mark, and in those 3 losses at SMU, Stanford, and Cal, they did not just lose, they bled points, giving up around 92 a night when those games turned into races instead of structured half-court battles. That kind of profile tells you something simple but important. When the environment is not friendly and the game speed gets away from them, their defense has a habit of cracking rather than bending. Virginia, on the other hand, is in a very different place right now. They are sitting at 16-2 overall, 5-1 in the Atlantic Coast Conference, top 15 in the rankings, and a perfect 10-0 at home, which is not just a cute stat. It is a sign that their home floor is behaving like a real edge this season. They have stacked 5 straight wins, including back-to-back Quadrant 1 victories on the road at Louisville and SMU, which is the kind of thing that usually earns respect from both computers and oddsmakers. Under Ryan Odom, this version of Virginia scores more efficiently without giving up its defensive soul, living around 84 points per game with a top 20 offense that is paired with a top 20 defense. So it is not just a grind, it is a grind with actual scoring punch on their side. The tempo piece is where the style really shows up. Virginia lives in the slow lane, with their pace sitting around the mid-60s in possessions, bottom 10% nationally, and their defensive possessions often stretch deep into the clock, close to that 18 to 19 second range. Let me explain why that matters. Every second that ticks away without North Carolina getting into rhythm is another small win for Virginia, because the Tar Heels prefer a game where they can get quick triggers and run off misses, not a test where every shot comes after a long stare at the shot clock. When you combine that slow, controlling style with a home crowd, you get an environment where the favorite can gradually wear down a visiting team that already has a shaky road resume. The betting market has mostly reflected that gap. Virginia has been sitting as a clear favorite, roughly around a touchdown margin at home on most boards, with North Carolina catching points and the money line leaning hard toward the Cavaliers. You also have the extra wrinkles, the adjusted noon local tip because of the winter storm, which can mess a bit with the rhythm of a visiting team, plus the availability notes that show Virginia coming in clean while North Carolina is dealing with a couple of absences and at least one guard carrying a game-time tag. Put all of that together, the spotless home record, the recent form, the stark contrast between North Carolina's home self and road self, and a style that tends to reward the disciplined favorite over the free-flowing visitor, and you get a matchup where the spread looks less like brand tax and more like a fair reflection of where these two teams are right now, even if the number feels a little lofty at first glance. As our first pick for this matchup, the Virginia Cavaliers to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Now, if you shift your focus away from who covers and look only at how many points might actually land on the scoreboard, the picture changes a bit, but it is built from the same ingredients. The posted total floating around the high 140s, in that 149.5 neighborhood, basically asks you to believe that both teams will fully lean into their raw scoring averages. On paper, that is tempting, Virginia sitting around 84 a game and North Carolina above 82. But the way those points arrive is not identical, and that difference is where this handicap really lives. Virginia's attack this season is more about shot quality and patience than chaos. They do not rush, they hunt the look they want, and they are fine using almost the whole clock if that is what it takes to get to a good attempt. What makes them dangerous is that this measured approach is paired with a defense that has quietly rounded into something nasty again, sitting in that top 20 range for adjusted defensive efficiency, top tier in effective field goal defense, strong near the top in three-point defense, and right near the very top of the country in block rate. They sprinkle in a light press that does not gamble wildly but trims a few early seconds from the possession, then funnel you toward rim protection and physical half-court help. It is like they use time itself as a defender, shrinking the number of clean looks you can generate in a game. If you want a concrete picture of how that can play out, think back to that home win over Stanford that finished around 70-55, a total of roughly 125 points. Virginia scored efficiently in that one, but because they dictated pace and spacing, the game never really felt like it wanted to push toward a shootout. That is the kind of script their fans have gotten used to, a scoreboard that looks lower than you might guess if you only glanced at season scoring averages. North Carolina sits on the other side of the style spectrum most nights. Their offense absolutely has the ability to explode, and when they get in rhythm it can snowball fast. The problem, at least so far on the road, is that their games have not just been high-scoring, they have been unstable. That 1-3 road record with those losses at SMU, Stanford, and Cal featured matchups where the game broke into something of a track meet and their defense could not keep pace with the scoring. Those environments inflated totals, but they also highlighted how risky it can be when the tempo gets too high and the possession count spikes. Here is the thing, Virginia is not trying to create that kind of game. Their defense, by design, stretches possessions, forces you into late clock decisions, and uses that mix of press, positional size, and rim deterrence to sand down the efficiency of each trip. If this matchup follows the identity both teams have shown so far, you are more likely looking at a tempo in the mid-60s in possessions rather than something wild in the 70s. From there, a reasonable scoring band would have Virginia landing somewhere in the low to mid-70s and North Carolina more in the mid-60s range, which stacks up in the low 140s instead of pushing toward 150. Layer in the early tip, the conference stakes, and the general tendency for coaches in these spots to value each possession a little more, and it supports a game script where defense, pace control, and patience keep the number from fully matching those raw season scoring averages. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Wake Forest versus Duke. Cameron Indoor on a Saturday with Wake Forest coming in is one of those scenes that almost tells the story for you already. You have a Duke team sitting at 17-1, unbeaten at home in league play, ranked in the national top 5 in both major polls, and completely comfortable in its own noise. Across from them, Wake Forest walks in at 11-8, still trying to find its footing in the conference, and that difference in stability shows up in everything from their body language to their late-game possessions. The books have reacted to that gap with a spread that floats in the high teens, roughly in that 17.5-point neighborhood, which already tells you how sharply the market sees the divide here, not just in talent but in consistency. Now, the rosters and health reports quietly support that story without needing any drama. Duke has Cameron Boozer and Caden Boozer in full swing, with Malik Brown, Isaiah Evans, Caleb Foster, Patrick Ntongba II, and Dame Sarr all active and contributing in real minutes. Nobody from that core group is flagged on public injury lists, while the only major medical notes are big man Ifeanyi Ufechukwu ruled out for the season and Sebastian Wilkins redshirting, which essentially means Duke is operating with its primary rotation intact. When a team with that much size, skill, and depth comes in at full strength, it tends to stretch margins, especially at home. Wake's main guys, like Juke Harris, Miles Colvin, Nate Calmezy, and Trayvon Spillers, are also present and accounted for on their roster and have been logging real roles, which is encouraging for them offensively, but it also means what you have seen from Wake so far is pretty much the real version of this group. If you look at how Wake Forest has actually been performing, the recent picture tells you why the spread is as inflated as it is. They score, they really do, but they also leak. They give up around 76 points per game, and the home loss to SMU, where they surrendered 91 and got beaten 40-28 on the glass, is a perfect snapshot of the problem. They play with energy and pace, but they can struggle to finish possessions with a rebound, and they sometimes allow clean looks when rotations stretch, which is exactly the sort of thing that turns into trouble inside a loud building. Duke, on the other side, has that heavyweight feel. They average about 85.5 points per game while allowing roughly 65, and that healthy scoring margin is not an accident, it is how they play. They can grind if they need to, but more often they hit you in waves. A close game for 10 minutes suddenly becomes a double-digit margin after 1 or 2 bursts. That pattern keeps showing up whether they are at Cameron or on the road, with road wins at Stanford and Cal already showing that this roster can travel, focus, and then come home without losing that edge. When that same group comes back into its home floor with fresh legs and a familiar rim, those small runs tend to grow rather than shrink. It also matters that this is not some sleepy midweek non-conference thing. It is an Atlantic Coast Conference game in a very famous gym, with local attention on the unusual tip time and plenty of emotion in the building. Those little quirks, like a weird start time or a slightly disrupted routine, usually hurt the visiting underdog more than the veteran favorite because the home side has that crowd as a cushion whenever the rhythm feels off. You can almost picture Wake hanging around early, hitting a couple of jumpers, then slowly running into a wall of size and depth as rotations tighten and foul trouble or fatigue starts to show. Honestly, that is often how big numbers like this get covered, not from a single knockout punch, but from a slow pull away as the game wears on. The history between these two programs also nudges you toward what the number is hinting at. Duke has taken 8 of the last 10 straight up, while covering about half of those against the spread. In some seasons, that might push a bettor to hesitate around a heavy favorite, but this particular Duke team has more steady firepower than a few of those recent versions, and this particular Wake defense has shown more vulnerability. So when you line up the current records, the healthy rotations, the home court, the rebounding edge, and the fact that Duke has been comfortable winning by large margins anyway, the case leans toward the idea that the market's high number is not just inflated noise, it is a reflection of a real gap in quality and reliability. As our first pick for this matchup, the Duke Blue Devils to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. Now, once you move from the spread to how many points might actually hit the board, the conversation shifts, even if a lot of the same actors are on stage. The total sits in that low 150s range, and that is a neighborhood where the rhythm of the game matters more than the jersey. Wake Forest is not built to win a slow, grinding contest. They come in averaging about 81 points per game, which tells you they are far more comfortable in a game with pace, space, and plenty of possessions. Harris, Colvin, Calmes, and Spillers all push the tempo by how they play, whether it is attacking off the bounce, running in transition, or hunting quick looks early in the clock. Even if the shots are not always falling, that style keeps the scoreboard busy simply because more trips up and down the floor means more chances to score. Duke is not shying away from that kind of game either. They have been putting up those 85.5 points per game for a reason. They score inside, they score on the perimeter, and they have enough shooting that defenders cannot just pack the paint and hope for the best. One of the sneaky parts of their scoring profile is how the bench keeps the pace from collapsing. When the starters sit, the energy might change a bit, but the aggression on offense usually stays the same, so runs from the second unit can keep the total climbing. Those road performances at Florida State, Louisville, Stanford, and against SMU, where combined scores have landed in comfortable scoring ranges, show that as long as the opponent is willing to play fast, Duke has no problem keeping the gas pedal involved. Defensively, there is a bit of tension that actually works in favor of the number. Duke holds teams to around 65 points per game, which is a strong mark, yet they are facing a Wake offense that is not broken, just streaky. Wake can have droughts, sure, but they also have bursts where they put up points in a hurry. And that combination often means the game swings from quiet stretches to sudden flurries. On the other end, Wake's defense giving up around 76 points per game is exactly the kind of profile that can turn into a long night against a polished offense. The SMU game is a good example. They allowed 91, with SMU shooting 50% from the field and 50% from 3, and that was in Wake's own gym. Take that same defensive structure, drop it into a building where the home team thrives on momentum, and it is not hard to see a lot of possessions ending at the rim or behind the arc. When you look at how these matchups have played out in recent years, the flow backs up that feeling. 2 of the last 3 meetings have landed in scoring ranges that went over the closing total for those specific games, with combined scores in the 130s and 150s. If you widen the frame to the last 10 meetings, the over has cashed in 6 of them, which again hints that when these two programs meet, the style often tilts toward more points rather than fewer. It is not that every single game turns into a race, but the pattern suggests that once the whistle blows and both teams settle into what they do best, possessions, shots, and free throws add up. Projecting a rough median, using nothing more fancy than the current scoring and defensive numbers plus the tempo each side prefers, you end up with a picture that looks something like one team in the mid-80s and the other in the high 60s or low 70s. Something in that 86 to 70 ballpark, give or take a few points either way, which puts you right around or slightly above the current total range. That is not a prediction of an exact final score, just a simple way to see whether the number feels low or high compared to how these teams actually play. If the game stays competitive, Wake will keep pushing pace because that is how they are wired. If one side stretches the lead, the trailing team usually leans even harder into quick shots and a faster tempo, which again keeps the door open for extra points. And with both teams having talented guards and wings that like to attack, garbage time often still features scoring rather than endless walk-it-up possessions. So when you stack Wake's preference for pace, Duke's scoring punch, a leaky Wake defense, and a history of matchups that often tilt toward offense, the number in the low 150s does not feel inflated. It feels reachable and possibly a bit conservative. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Villanova versus UConn. This one in Hartford feels like a proper main event, not some random Saturday matinee you half-watch while scrolling your phone. UConn walks in as a freight train at 18-1 overall and 8-0 in Big East play, while Villanova shows up at 15-4 and 6-2, which is exactly the kind of record that earns respect but not fear. The number hanging out there has UConn as a clear favorite, sitting in that high single to low double-digit window, which tells you oddsmakers believe the Huskies are better on most nights, but they still have to sweat Villanova's knack for dragging people into uncomfortable games. You do not even need to start with spreadsheets to feel why the market leans that way. UConn has the look of a team that toys with the idea of boredom, then remembers it enjoys hammering people too much. They are beating opponents by about 15 points per game, scoring in the high 70s and giving up just over 60, and those are not numbers built on a diet of cupcakes. They have already handled brands like Kansas, Florida, and Marquette, and even when the offense sputters, that defense holds the floor steady like a stagehand nobody notices until the lights go out. On the other side, Villanova has quietly turned into that coworker who never raises their voice but always shows up with the deck finished and the coffee already made. They are outscoring teams by about 9 points a night, can shoot from deep, and, more importantly, they control pace like it is a point of personal pride. Their tempo is glacial by modern standards, sitting near the very bottom nationally in possessions per game, which is great when you are the surgeon, less fun when you run into a heavyweight that enjoys wrestling in the half court as much as UConn does. Here is the thing, though. Villanova's slow style does not actually scare UConn the way it might rattle a fragile favorite. UConn is perfectly happy to win a grind where both teams live in the half court, the ball sticks to the paint, and every cut feels like it comes with a bruise. Their defense is top tier by basically every serious metric that matters, sitting in the national top 10 in both scoring defense and advanced defensive efficiency, and they have the length to make every Villanova catch feel just a little bit late and a little bit crowded. When you put an elite half-court defense against a patient but not explosive offense, you often get those long stretches where the scoreboard refuses to move. And those stretches tend to favor the team already spotting the points, as long as they are the ones stacking stops. Now, trend watchers will look at UConn's record against the spread and frown a little. They are winning tons of games outright but have been far kinder to moneyline bettors than to anyone who keeps backing them to cover big numbers. Villanova, in contrast, has been one of those teams that quietly pays the bills, covering far more often than not, which is exactly why you see a spread that gives them a bit of respect instead of a full-on please do not watch the second half number. That is the trap, and it is a familiar one. You see the historical trend, you see Villanova's road competence, and you start talking yourself into the underdog before you fully process how nasty UConn's defensive ceiling really is in this specific matchup. Trends live in the past, matchup lives in the present, speculative. In a slow, physical game where every possession feels like a mini rock fight, I want the side that has the higher ceiling on each trip, the deeper bag of counters, and the better chance to turn 3 empty Villanova trips into an 8-0 run. UConn's ability to string together stops without sacrificing shot quality on the other end is the kind of thing that does not show up in those quick, against-the-spread record graphics but absolutely matters when the spread is large and everyone is asking if the favorite can separate. Villanova can keep this tight for long stretches. They are too disciplined not to, but the more possessions you stack against a defense this good, the more chances you give it to find that one decisive burst, the run that flips a 6-point game into a 15-point problem. People's Bank Arena adds a funny twist because it is technically a home game but has a bit of a showcase feel, a downtown building, a different backdrop, a slightly different energy than the campus gym. For Villanova, it is hostile enough. For UConn, it is still a building where their logo is on the court and their fans outnumber yours in every direction. When a favorite of this caliber gets a full week to prepare, a big stage, and a ranked opponent with just enough hype to keep them locked in, that is usually a recipe for focus instead of a letdown. If this turns into a who blinks first kind of afternoon, the team that already lives at a double-digit scoring margin has a lot more room to stretch. As our first pick for this matchup, the UConn Huskies to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. This total number sitting in the mid-130s feels like a silent argument between what people think these brands are and what they actually are right now. UConn has a reputation for throwing haymakers on offense. Villanova carries an old image of high-powered guard play and barrage shooting, and your brain wants to picture a fireworks show. But the current versions of these teams tell a slower, more controlled story. Start with pace. Villanova is one of the slowest teams in the entire country, using just over 63 possessions per game, which is near the bottom of Division I. They walk the ball up, they call sets, they use clock, and they do it on purpose. UConn is not racing up and down either. They sit solidly in the middle of the tempo pack, more than happy to run when a lane is wide open but just as comfortable grinding through half-court actions if that is what the matchup asks for. Put those two personalities together, and you are far more likely to get a game in the mid-60s in possessions than anything that feels like a full-track meet. Then you layer on UConn's defense, which is not just good, it is miserable to play against. They are holding opponents to just over 63 points per game, top 10 nationally in scoring defense, while also sitting near the top of the charts in advanced defensive efficiency and effective field goal percentage allowed. In plain language, they make you miss, they deny clean looks, and they do it without constantly bailing you out with fouls. When that kind of defense meets a Villanova offense that is comfortable winning games in the high 60s instead of chasing 80, it becomes really hard for both teams to sail past a mid-130s total unless something very strange happens. Villanova, for its part, is no sieve on the defensive end. They hold opponents under 70 points per night, are reasonably stingy from three, and they are good at making opponents work for every catch, which pairs nicely with their slow tempo as a natural break on scoring. You rarely see them in pure shootouts because they answer a made shot not by rushing, but by calmly running another 30-second possession that keeps the game from spiraling into chaos. That is great for anyone who enjoys methodical basketball, less great if you are holding an over ticket and begging for loose, fast possessions. There is also the emotional shape of a game like this. Big East spotlight, national TV window, and a building that both programs understand is going to be loud from the opening tip. Coaches tend to lean a little more conservative early in these spots, valuing shot selection and matchups over early clock heat checks. You can almost feel the first few minutes in your head. Long possessions, both teams hunting mismatches, everyone just a little tight as they read how the officials are calling contact. If that first stretch lands something like 8-6 after 6 or 7 minutes, the total starts to feel heavier on your shoulders almost immediately. Villanova, for its part, is no sieve. They are allowing under 69 points per game. They guard threes well, and they rarely give up long waves of transition scoring. Villanova.com speculative. In a marquee Big East showdown with both coaches obsessing over scouting details all week, the first instinct on both benches is often to be careful, not loose. Both staffs know the one thing they absolutely cannot live with is letting this turn into a free-flowing offensive party where someone finds 85. Everything about their recent tendencies screams keep this in the 60s and low 70s and see who blinks. When you zoom out and picture realistic score bands, you are not really imagining many worlds where both teams pop off at the same time. One script has UConn controlling things, Villanova scratching and clawing, and the final landing somewhere like low 70s to low 60s. Another has Villanova's pace drag both teams into an even grittier trench war, where both sides sit in the 60s and you find yourself checking the live line and wondering how the pregame total ever got as high as it did. Could shot-making spike and blow this up? Sure, but with UConn's defense, Villanova's tempo, and the stakes of the matchup, that feels like the less likely branch of the tree instead of the default. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Houston versus Texas Tech. If you like big games with a little bit of chaos baked in, this one feels made for you. Two top 15 teams, a noon local tip, national cameras, and a building that already treats most regular conference games like a playoff series. Houston walks into Lubbock with that terrifying resume, 17-1 overall and 5-0 in Big 12 play, built on a defense that holds teams to around 60 points a night and a tempo that moves like wet cement. They are methodical, they are physical, and they have that absurd road heater going. 16 straight true road wins, which is the kind of streak that makes odds makers sleep a little less comfortably. Texas Tech answers with its own version of loud. 15-4 overall, 5-1 in the Big 12, 10-0 at home, and the numbers only hint at what that home floor actually feels like when a ranked team walks in. United Supermarkets Arena is not just loud, it is personal, and in a season where Tech is burying over 11 threes a game and sitting near the very top of the country and makes from deep, that crowd energy turns every jumper into a small earthquake. Houston wants you to walk the ball up, run your set, and bump into a brick wall for 30 seconds. Tech wants you to make one tiny mistake in space so it can spray the ball to the corner and make you pay 3 points at a time. We already saw the first chapter of this story. Back on January 6th, these two met in Houston, and the Cougars needed a late push and some big-time shot-making to sneak out with a 69-65 win. Texas Tech still left that floor knowing it had gone toe-to-toe with the bully in his own gym. 9 made threes, only a handful of bench scoring, and still the Red Raiders were 1 or 2 clean possessions away from stealing it. Houston did what Houston does, won the free throw battle, won the glass, turned Tech's turnovers into just enough cheap points, but there was nothing in that game that suggested one team was out of its depth. Now flip the script. Same matchup, but instead of Tech trying to survive 40 minutes in Houston's lab, Houston has to live inside Tech's storm for 2 hours. The Red Raiders are still that high-level offense by the advanced numbers, top tier in efficiency with a respectable defense wrapped around it, and now they get the whistle, the sight lines, and the adrenaline that come with being the home side in a game day building. There is a big difference between asking Houston to win the game, which it obviously can, and asking them to win it by margin on the road against a team that can erase a 6-point lead with 2 possessions and a couple of clean looks from deep. When a dog plays fast, shoots a ton of threes, and is not intimidated by your physicality because it just saw it 3 weeks ago, that is the exact type of underdog that turns a short spread into a real sweat. Here is the thing, every Houston strength is still there, the rebounding, the half-court defense, the composure, and none of that should be dismissed. But the number hanging on this game is not asking whether Houston is very good, we already know that. It is asking whether Houston can consistently keep Tech at arm's length for 40 minutes in a building that has been a complete no-fly zone so far. Speculative betting opinion here, not a guaranteed outcome. This matchup profile, with a coin flip feel and a tiny spread, tends to make the extra points on the hungry home side look more attractive than the shiny ranking on the road favorite. As our first pick for this matchup, the Texas Tech Red Raiders to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. If you glance at Houston's defensive resume and glacial tempo, your brain immediately whispers low-scoring rock fight and moves on. Second nationally in scoring defense, one of the slowest paces in Division I, the whole reputation screams under. The total, sitting in that high 130s to low 140s neighborhood, is basically asking, are you sure you want to step in front of this defense? But context matters. The first meeting still finished with 134 combined points on a night when both teams took turns getting stuck in mud offensively. Texas Tech shot it fine from 3, Houston was weirdly cold from deep, and both offenses still found ways to manufacture points late. You had long stretches where it felt like every possession was being played through quicksand, and yet, once the endgame fouls and pressure possessions arrived, the scoreboard quietly crept into the mid-130s. That is not a promise that it will happen again. That is a clue that the ceiling is higher than the defensive slugfest label suggests. Look at how Tech actually wants to play, especially at home. They spread the floor, hunt mismatches in space, and are perfectly happy to let it fly from beyond the arc over and over again. When you are near the top of the country and made threes per game, every trip has a little volatility baked in. Miss a couple and you can go dry. Hit a couple and the entire rhythm of the game tilts into a faster, freer style. That is especially true in front of their own fans, where one made 3 can turn into a mini avalanche simply because the building refuses to quiet down. Houston, for its part, is not some offensively broken grinder. The advanced numbers actually like their scoring profile, comfortably top 20 in efficiency with a group that knows how to punish a defense for overhelping or losing track of cutters. They live on the offensive glass, they punch gaps, and they quietly pile up free throws. Even in slower games, that kind of efficiency tends to nudge you toward the high 60s and low 70s offensively more often than not. And if Tech is hitting shots on the other side, suddenly Houston is running more off long rebounds, playing against an unset defense a bit more, and the game tempo creeps up almost without anyone noticing. There is also the boring but important thing no one likes to talk about when they first look at a total: whistles. Both of these teams are physical. Houston challenges every cut, every screen, every drive. Tech does not mind bodying you on the perimeter or at the rim. In a high-profile Big 12 game with two ranked teams, the refs usually try to keep control. That often means early fouls, bonus free throws, and long second halves. If this game sits within 1 or 2 possessions late, the standard endgame sequence kicks in: extended possessions, intentional fouls, free throws with nobody on the lane, and the kind of quiet scoring that can drag a total across the finish line almost by accident. Honestly, if you have watched this league for any length of time, you know how fast a defensive war can turn into a 50-point second half once legs get tired and shooters get comfortable. This whole read on the total is, by definition, speculative projection about game flow, not a statement of present fact. But with Tech's offensive firepower, Houston's underrated scoring efficiency, and all the little helpers that show up in a big televised game, the path where this lands above the number feels a bit more natural than the script where both teams sit in the 50s and politely shake hands at the horn. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. West Virginia versus Arizona. Arizona walks into this one carrying that shiny number 1 next to its name and a perfect record to go with it. 19-0 overall is not an accident. It is the kind of start that turns every home game at McKell Center into a bit of a show. You can almost hear the band already, students in red, everybody in Tucson expecting another comfortable afternoon, and the spread sitting up in that 17.5 neighborhood for Arizona as the favorite. On the other side, West Virginia rolls in at 13-6, which sounds solid already, but the shape of that record matters just as much as the numbers. They have taken a pretty demanding early Big 12 path, picked off some respected names, and just used this trip out west to settle in with that comeback win at Arizona State that finally got them a road victory this season. So this is not some scared visitor wandering into the desert for the first time. They have already handled the travel, the time change, and the weirdness of playing far from Morgantown. The personality of this West Virginia team is almost the opposite of what you expect when you think of a huge underdog in a game like this. They are not trying to trade haymakers in transition. They are perfectly happy to slow everything down, walk the ball up, and make every possession feel like waiting in a slow line at the DMAV. Pace numbers back that up. They are operating at one of the slowest tempos in the country under Ross Hodge, and they combine that crawl with a defense that grades out as a top 25 unit nationally in efficiency. That mix, boring in a good way, is pretty much the blueprint you want when you are catching a big pile of points. Arizona, for its part, is scary good, and it is worth saying that clearly. They score almost 90 points per night, sit in the top handful of teams in offensive efficiency, and they do it without living or dying by a barrage of threes. Instead, they pound the paint, get to the line, share the ball, and roll out wave after wave of real size with guys like Koa Pete, Motiejas Krivas, Toby Awaka, Jaden Bradley, Braden Burries, and Anthony Del Orso all comfortably in the regular rotation and on the current roster. That is not a fun scouting report if you are the underdog. But here is the thing, Arizona's preferred style actually leaves a small door open for a team like West Virginia to hang around longer than the number suggests. The Wildcats are not bombing away from deep in huge volume. Their three-point attempt rate is among the lower groups nationally, and in Big 12 play they are sitting around 31% from outside. They want to get inside and attack, and that is exactly where West Virginia has some real bodies to throw at them, with size like Harlan Abioa and length like Brennan Lorient ready to stand in the way and make Arizona finish through contact instead of in space. When you add in that West Virginia's main pieces, Honor Hupp, Trayson Eaglestaff, and Jasper Floyd are all active, comfortable in their roles, and coming off confident performances on this trip, you start to see how this can turn into more of a grind than a runway show for the top seed. Injuries do not really tilt things away from that script either. West Virginia has backup Big Abraham Oyadier ruled out and Harlan Abioha listed as probable with an undisclosed issue, but the expectation from the latest reports is that Obioha suits up, and Arizona is listed with no current injuries at all. So we are not dealing with a short-handed underdog limping into Tucson, or a favorite missing a key starter, which makes the matchup mostly about style, discipline, and how much Arizona truly wants to push that margin in a league game. Arizona can absolutely win this by a comfortable amount. They have already piled up many double-digit wins, but asking them to blow past a slow-paced, physically tough, defense-first group that has already proven it can function out here is a bigger ask than it first appears when you just glance at the ranking and the jersey color. As our first pick for this matchup, the West Virginia Mountaineers to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. The total number sitting in the mid-140s is basically the market's way of saying Arizona will pull this game into something fairly high-scoring almost by force. You see a team scoring just under 90 points a night with a top-tier offensive efficiency rating, and it is natural for odds makers to expect another track-style afternoon. On paper, that idea makes sense. Arizona's last couple of outings fit the image of an offense that can put games out of reach early. They hung 84 on UCF on the road, then came home and handled Cincinnati by pulling away in the second half, and both performances featured the usual committee approach, with Krivas, Pete, Bradley, Burries, and others all chipping into that scoring load. When you are that efficient, you do not need every possession to be perfect, you just need enough clean looks to fall. West Virginia, though, has a way of sitting on a game and shrinking it that can really mess with those high totals. Their defensive efficiency slot around the top 25 nationally is not just a pretty number, it shows up in real games as long, frustrating possessions where opponents are forced into late clock decisions. And that kind of thing pulls total scores down little by little. The Mountaineers also sit in a lower scoring band themselves, averaging in the low 70s, and that combination of strong defense and modest offense is usually what you see underneath a lot of unders on a schedule. It is not sexy, but it is effective. Recent form lines up with that picture. Those impressive wins over ranked Kansas, Colorado, and Arizona State have certainly boosted confidence, but look at the way they happened, with West Virginia holding teams to manageable numbers while never really needing to get into the mid-80s themselves to land a punch. Their pace is slow by design, not by accident, and in a spot like this, that means fewer total possessions for Arizona to turn this into one of their 90-plus explosions. It is also worth remembering that Arizona's scoring profile is a bit sneaky. They are putting up huge numbers, but they are doing it with efficient twos, free throws, and a more traditional inside-out attack, not with 15 made threes every night. If West Virginia can wall off the paint reasonably well, compete on the glass, and avoid giving up a parade to the free throw line, that shaves points away in a quiet but very real way. And because the Mountaineers are so comfortable dragging possessions deep into the shot clock on their own offense too, even a game where Arizona feels in control can still end up with a total that lands under the posted number. There is always a path where Arizona's talent just overwhelms. The game gets loose, threes start falling for both sides, and the scoreboard climbs, and that is the risk baked into any under in a matchup with an elite offense. But with both teams arriving mostly healthy, West Virginia already acclimated to the desert, and every signal from tempo and defensive numbers pointing toward a methodical, low-possession afternoon rather than a wild shootout, the more reasonable expectation is for a game that feels intense without turning into a scoring festival. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.